Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Welcome. Yeah, I love it. The salute. That was great. Welcome and welcome back to another live show about the history of the Russian Revolution by Leon Trotsky. And this is my co-host, Tony.
Hello.
Yes, you've been very consistent coming to the lives. I really appreciate that. Hello, Urza's here. Say hello if you're in the chat and if you're reading along with us. I know there's some people still reading along with us, so good job, guys. We're over a third of the way done. And we are also done with the February Revolution, and now we are officially in the July days.
Yes.
So that's really exciting. I've been waiting for this. I'm really excited for the July days. So, welcome. Hi, Mimi. Yeah, I mean everybody's traveling in summer, so trust me, I get it. We're glad you're here today. Ah, yes, just when Lenin gets back from Germany. Hey, Carla's here. Hi, Carla.
Hello.
We've also been getting a little bit more Trotsky sprinkled in. He's talking about himself a little bit.
Yeah. In the third person, which I still find a bit weird and uncomfortable.
It is a little bit weird.
So, Trotsky, you're talking about yourself. You can just say I. And I know you're trying to make it look like it's a very proper piece of history, but everybody knows that you're talking about you, so it doesn't make any difference.
It's a little weird. But I'm excited that we're actually hearing from him about
yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say there's one particular bit in the chapter on the I can't remember if it's the last, it's 25 or 24, where he's talking about some people tried to arrest Kerensky and he stepped in to stop them arresting Kerensky, and all that's done in the third person, including a bit where he says, and then Trotsky responded to these accusations. You just have to say that say please, just
yes,
say I.
Yeah.
But it's I know why he's doing it, because he's trying to make it like an objective history.
Yeah.
I think he thinks that helps. But everybody knows when he says Trotsky, he's talking about himself. So as I said, it seems like a pointless.
Yeah. We all know. So
yeah.
Whatever you're comfortable with. When he's really in there a lot, we'll probably get used to it,
Yeah.
For now, it's just like it's like in like a director who's doing like a cameo. We're like, oh, we spotted Trotsky.
Yeah, it's like Alfred Hitchcock in all of his films, walking in the background.
Yeah. Exactly. But he is doing a good job. I feel like for several chapters now, it's been like very repetitive though. There's been like so much repetition. I know he usually shifts it, like he shifts the perspective a little bit, but also like I've finally been able to start reading it quicker because I'm like, I feel like we already covered this. So
yeah, I think because I think it's partly because he keeps going back over the same points because at each stage of the event, because it's like, oh, why didn't the Bolsheviks react to this?
Yeah.
Why? And it's the same. He's making the same point. I did find although the July days is fascinating, I did find these chapters the hardest to read so far in the book. And I could have done without the appendices in between part 1 and part 2.
Yeah, that was a bit rough.
But it's still fast, because I suppose the events themselves are so fascinating. It's hard to actually make them entirely dull. So you kind of it's the and again, I think because he's trying to make it seem like an objective history. He wants to make, but he's also got points to make that are what he wants to make about why the revolution happened when it did, why it didn't, why they didn't seize control during July when they maybe had a chance. And he's making kind of, I don't know if he's making excuses. He's sort of justifying the fact that it took until
October,
November for it to happen.
He's trying to explain the mind frames of everybody involved, like their mindset, really in detail. Which which is good. I mean, he tries to explain, even though he's much more acidic and sarcastic about the provisional government than he is about the. He does try and put what they were thinking out there as well. Yes. He is, like you said, sarcastic, but also somewhat fair. Like, I see it from their perspective, you know?
Yeah. I mean, he's basically he's making it clear that they were wrong all along. But he's doing it in a way that makes it look fair, even if I'm not entirely how fair it actually is in reality is.
Yeah. We'll have to read. Like, I'm really glad you're reading things on the side, because I'm listening to stuff as well. Like, I'm listening to a podcast about Stalin. Like, every week a new episode comes out, and I'm like riveted. But we're not to Stalin really yet. So
no. Well, when I was going through the preparation for Red September to plug another thing we're doing.
Yes, tomorrow we're having a live show announcement, so we hope you'll join us tomorrow.
I was going through my list of all my books on that were potentially possible for a TBR for next month. I will send you the Excel sheet that I've done.
Yeah, do.
Because I don't want to go. Because if I take 2 minutes on each book I've got on the list, it's going to it'll mean that I'll have an hour of my own on that podcast. Actually, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but I was thinking I really would like to read something. I would really like to read something about Stalin. I might read Young Stalin again.
Oh yeah, cool.
I think that covers, from what I remember, it's a long time since I read it. That covers the revolution up to the revolution. No, actually, I think it starts off. It's a book after that. I can't remember. It's too long since I read it. But one of the first two volumes of his sort of Stalin trilogy covers the revolution. So I'd like to see it written. And also, I've got a very big 2-volume, and there's a third volume coming, biography of Stalin. I think each volume is like 1,000 pages.
Wow.
And one of those, I think the second volume goes up to the revolution, covers the revolution. So I might just read those bits in that book rather than try. I'll read the whole things eventually, but I haven't got time and energy to read 2,000 pages of biography of Stalin at this point.
Oh man. So okay, I'm curious about the counter-revolution. Yes. Yeah, because he does describe it to some degree, but I don't know. Do you think we're going to get more about this, or are we coming to the end of that pretty soon?
I think we might do, because even though we're in July, there's still 4 months before the actual revolution. So there's still, because they start arresting people at this point, and they start because Trotsky is imprisoned at some. So they start. So there is still that part of the counter revolution to come, where they try and start rounding up the Bolsheviks, and putting them in prison. But it seems to me, as I think we've said a number of times, it's out of the hands of the Bolsheviks. I think at this point, it's out of the hands of everybody. It's the people. It's the people in. It's the workers. They're
pushing things forward.
Yeah, because he asks the question, because Trotsky says, like, why didn't we seize power in July? And it's a good question, because it looks like you had the opportunity to do it.
I know, and everybody was so frustrated because of the condition. Like, the living conditions were obviously really, really difficult. So there was like a really interesting quote about like the amount of like the train loads that were successfully getting there. It was like 10% of what they needed to feed the population was getting there. So
and the war was still going on badly, so that was still and they still seem
Yeah.
to have lost. The provisional government still seem to have lost the army, the
Yeah.
rank and file of the army, most of them.
Yeah. So is it? We should address some of the comments, but I want to talk about how common is it in a revolution for it to pretty much be landowners versus people who don't own land, because that's what it seems to be in this case. But let's
I'm just trying to think with the English Civil War, with the English let's call it the English Revolution for now.
Yeah,
the English Civil War. That was initially two sets of landlords, basically fundamentally against each other. It tried to, it sort of nudged towards becoming something else later once they executed the king, once they arrested the king and then executed the king, and you had the levelers and Cromwell's army was very radical, and you have the Putney debates. So that at that point it might. So, but fundamentally, that's for the most part, and also there's a solid religious element to that. So with that one, probably not. But also, you can argue that's not really a revolution. That's just a civil war, and I've always thought of it as a revolution of sorts. The Civil War is a sort of side part of that revolution.
Interesting. So overall, you would say it was a revolution, and the Civil War was like a battle.
Yeah, it was the consequences of there was a political battle going on that ended up being actual military battle. Because von Clausewitz famously said that war is diplomacy by other means, and I think the English Civil War is politics by other means. Again, I should put a thing in here and say I'm not an expert on any of these things. This is just my basic. I did the English Civil causes. I did the causes of the English Civil War at university and wrote a very long essay on it. And
I got a comment recently on one of my Dostoevsky videos, and they were like, "What qualifications do you have? Do you have a degree in this?" I was like, no, I don't. This is just talking about books." So.
I just like reading about history, and I do actually have a degree in history. To be fair,
okay. Well, you're more qualified than I am.
But that doesn't mean anything on these, because most of the reading I did on the English Civil War, I did 40 years. Well, when's 1992? 35, a long time ago, and I probably haven't kept up with the latest reading on the English Civil War. I was about to go into a rant then about this is why history is a dynamic discipline, and people who think they know about subjects because they studied them at school, but probably haven't read anything about them since they were at school, aren't actually up to date with history. But we'll move on from that. I know nothing about the Mexican Revolution, actually, so that's an interesting one.
That would be a good subject for Red September, honestly.
It probably would, actually. Because I know nothing.
Go ahead.
I know nothing about it apart from a couple of sort of little tiny bits. So I'd be fascinated to know more about that.
Yes. So Villa and Zapata represented the masses, and Venustiano Carranza the moderates, because he was a landowner. So that sounds very similar. Yeah, I can see the comparisons there, because it's the moderates who are doing the provisional government. Well, they call them liberals, which is very confusing to me. So liberals meaning the conservatives were like people who wanted to keep the czar, which I think the czar is dead by this time, right? He's already been just killed, or not yet?
He's still alive, I think.
Okay. Yeah, so they're still alive.
I don't think they kill him to the Civil War.
Oh, okay. So the czar is still alive, but he doesn't hold any power at this point.
Yeah.
So
I think
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think they're at the point here. This is the classic. I mean, it's a debate that still goes on. Like, for example, with the British Labour Party now, it's like there are people to the left of the Labour Party, significant, like degrees further and further left of the Labour Party. The Labour Party is, in theory, a socialist party, but you'd find it hard to argue at this point that it's particularly that socialist. So, let's say there was a British Revolution, and the Labour Party would be like the centre, the liberal bit against, but to the left then would be a gaggle of different parties that want more. So effectively, the Labour Party have seized control in Russia at this point, and all the other parties are trying to push them into doing more radical things, and they're trying not to do those. They want to do things. They want to change things, but they don't want to change things at the speed at which the Bolsheviks and the other
And even Trotsky was like, "Wait, let the liberals burn themselves out first and prove how terrible they are at this."
Yeah, but I think that's because I think
power.
I think the problem is people Trotsky and they're thinking too along too structured Marxist lines. They think things have to happen in a certain correct way, whereas actually they don't, and actually that's why they could have seized power in July. It would have led probably to the same things as October did, in that there would be a civil war and a But I suppose you might argue that leaving it till October, it gave the Kerensky, the provisional government, more opportunity to prove that they were rubbish. So that when the October Revolution happened, it was built on even solider foundations.
But that's true.
At this point, you're still talking about relatively small numbers of people, and it does still seem to be mostly focused on St. Petersburg and Moscow.
Yeah, mostly that's what.
Yeah. So
there
you don't
been
know
some redistribution. It sounds like in the more rural areas, but not to the same level.
But nobody's. It seems that the provisional government isn't. They're tinkering at the edges of what people want changed. Like, people want peace. People want peace. And the slogan was bread and peace, and people aren't getting either at this point. So you can't keep doing that forever and hope. And again, I've said before in this. Eventually, the choice is counter revolution, like a proper bloody murderous counter revolution, or a proper revolution. Because it can't go anywhere else at this point, I don't think.
Right. I know, yeah. They keep giving them chances, but eventually they're going to run out of patience.
Yeah, I don't think, to be fair to the provisional government, I don't think, or at least a chunk of the provisional government, I don't think their intention is a bloody counter-revolution. I don't think that's what they want. But they do want everything to quieten down a bit so they can get on with tinkering at the edges.
Yeah. Have you read this by any chance?
No, I really wanted to. I really, really wanted to. And I haven't.
I looked at this one too, and I was like, I need to read it. Is it pretty big?
I remember it being a big chunky book, but I could be wrong about that. I could be, because it partly sometimes, it's like, sometimes it depends on the edition, because sometimes you're looking at a book that's and sometimes they look like they're 600 pages long, sometimes they look like they're 50 pages. It's weird. But no, I haven't read it. I do want to read it. Actually, after this, I have to say this has made me want to read more Russian revolutions around the Russian Revolution, and
yay,
just to fill in gaps. And
same. I feel like we are doing the hard work by reading this book, and like after this, everything will feel easy, and it'll be like coasting and really interesting. Well,
it's like I'd really like to read a good book on Kerensky.
That'd be interesting.
But I don't know whether there's been one written in English for a while. I don't even know. There might well have been. because it's making there are things that flag as you read it that you flag up. Think, well, I'd like to know a bit more about that, or
Mm-hmm.
that person, or that event, or I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure there are books just on the July days.
Yeah, I'm sure there are. Is 10 Days That Shook the World, is that October or is it
Yeah, I think that's
February?
October. I think so.
October. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, there is still time. There is a lot of pages to go still.
Well, I think
We'll
we're
get
going to be. I think we're going to be reading this for a while.
I think so. I am going a little fast. Well, I don't know that my reading pace is a little bit faster, at least for now. I finally was like, I'm never actually going to finish it if I keep going super slow, but I think because I was so thorough for the first like third of it, that really kind of set my mind it's like my mind is ready for the rest of the information, I feel like. So hopefully I
Yeah,
can go faster.
and I think you are the fact that he does make the same points. He does try. To be fair to
Yeah.
him, he does try and make them in different ways, but he's
Yeah.
fundamentally making the same point. That it does actually become a bit easier to read because you're going, oh, that's him talking about this again.
Yeah.
But it so we know about that and da 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 da.
Right.
So I think that helps a bit.
He doesn't want to leave us with any questions by the end. He's like, I want you to know very thoroughly about everything.
Yeah, and I want you to get it. And I want you to know this is how I saw it. This is how I
Yes.
see it happening.
Yes. It is still, yeah, okay, this is something we should talk about. So he keeps referring to the compromisers in like a really negative way.
Yeah,
But I feel like compromise, maybe it just depends on the situation, but I feel like compromise is kind of the essence of good politics. But I
yeah,
think what he's saying is they were compromising, but they were really just trying to get what they wanted by holding out long enough that people would just give in and give them what they wanted. So what
yeah.
he's saying, I guess, is compromisers is in quotes, kind of.
Yeah. I think he mean when he talks about compromisers, he's
Mm.
he's talking about people that he thinks are trying to slow things down so that they can get so the control can be passed to the correct people.
Mm-hmm.
And then also there's an argument to be had that you can over compromise, as in you could
Yeah.
like for example Chamberlain and Hitler over
Yeah.
Czechoslovakia. That's compromise to some degree, but it's also abjectly surrendering to one side. Your compromise is kind of just it's
You're just giving in. You're not compromising.
yeah, you're not compromising, and I think that's
Yeah. Have you ever listened to Dan Carlin at all?
no, it doesn't ring a bell.
Okay. He does this podcast called Hardcore History. And one of his side note kind of podcasts recently that he talked about was basically that history can teach you very specific lessons, but they're not widely applicable all the time. Like how people say, oh, just because one dictator, who we compromised with, took advantage of it, not every dictator is going to make the same choice. So it depends on the situation and on the person. You can't just say never appease a dictator because a different dictator might make a different choice. And I was like,
Well,
wow, that's an interesting
yeah,
thought.
because one of the best examples is Anthony Eden was foreign secretary to Churchill in World War II. No, actually, he was foreign secretary. Was he foreign secretary? Anyway, he was foreign secretary at some point in the lead up to World War II. And the lesson he took from it was appeasement is bad and you've got to stand up to dictators, which meant when Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, Eden's reaction was, you have to stand up to these people they're dictators. You have to stand up to them, which was a terrible mistake to make, and therefore
Mm.
got us dragged into a war that didn't last very long. Pissed off the Americans, which at that point we couldn't just ignore because we weren't that powerful anymore, and undid a lot of good work. And Eden's lesson from history was you have to stand up to every dictator, whereas actually in the case of Nasser, it might have been better to just talk to him a bit. And
yeah, it just depends, I guess, on the situation.
yeah, each situation is different. I mean, I think history is the best use of history from what I think is that is it teaches you to ask questions about the information you are being given, and to ask questions about this piece of information I've been given. Who wrote it? Why did they write it? Who are they writing it for? Who are they trying to reach? What and you kind of it teaches you to have an open mind to maybe your cause, maybe something there's something here you need to, like, there's something missing that you need to fill a gap in to understand it better, or maybe you need to hear more from the other side of this argument because all you've heard is from one side.
Yeah, a good conversationalist will be able to express the other person's point of view in a way that they agree with, so that in history, I feel like that's really a really important thing about history is you can understand somebody else's point of view.
And I think you can. I
Yeah.
think you can also, something doesn't get talked about very often, I think, is that you can understand somebody's point of view, but you can absolutely disagree with it.
Yeah,
Even if you
exactly.
understand it. You can say, I understand why the Germans thought that that a chunk of Germany got behind Hitler in the late 20s because he seemed to have the arguments he was putting across seemed to be giving them answers to questions to issues that they were really struggling with. But understanding that doesn't make it right.
Right. Absolutely.
So you kind of have that as a thing.
Yeah.
But I also think that history, if you don't know basic historical facts about, particularly about your own country, you end up letting people run those countries that are idiots,
Yeah.
or have very weird agendas that repeat mistakes that were made in the past, without going into without naming any names. But it seems to be a problem. It's the denial of. I mean, the British case, the classic thing is there's an episode of The West Wing where they're talking about Ireland, and the president's invited. This is obviously back in the 90s. The president's invited the leader of Sinn Féin to the White House for St. Patrick's Day, and the British ambassador has said you can't invite this bloke to the St. Patrick's Day because he's a terrorist. And then they go out to the pub. Him and one of the president's things go out to the pub, and the British ambassador says, "Look, I know we're running out of options here from our involvement here. It might be good if the Americans stepped in to help." He said, "But as the British ambassador, I have to say that this man cannot come to the St. Patrick's Day dinner because I have to say that because that's my job." But they talk about what the issues that for countries that are there sort of found the problems that they never really properly dealt with, and that are the causes of their issues. For us, it's empire. For the US, it's slavery. And I think neither of those two issues has been properly dealt. Sorry, I'm going on a little weird political side rant, but I think for Russia, for the Soviet Union, it's the consequences of this revolution is their problem. Not the revolution itself. It's the consequences afterwards, and the dismantling of any kind of actual democracy in
And
favor
that's
of
why
dictatorship.
we'll be exploring Red September because it's so
Yay!
interesting.
Um,
This is a really good point, Mimi. I think
ooh,
so. Carla raised a good point earlier. Compromise is the enemy of integrity, and I think this is why politics are so difficult. Like, you're gonna have to get your hands dirty and make choices that somebody doesn't like, and it really, you can't always be consistent in if you're a politician, you know.
I
So
think,
yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think integrity. You have to have some firm lines in your you have to have some firm lines. You can't
Mhm.
compromise to the point at which you. I would say appeasement's the classic example. You can't compromise to the
Mhm.
point of risking your own national security. You have to have some lines to which you are not prepared to cross. Now, in the
Yeah.
end, Chamberlain had some, but they were too late,
Yeah,
really. Um,
and that's why
and
he was tossed out.
yeah, and I think it's you can't compromise is always a danger, but it's also
Yeah.
thinking about it's like the fact that when they talk about negotiation that thinking about negotiation as like get trying to get the most out of a deal that you can get out of a deal, whereas
Mm.
good negotiation is both sides come out of it winning,
Yeah, yeah.
and also it's also that is it the Japanese phrase about losing face as well. You want to make
Mm.
sure that nobody loses face.
Mhm.
Because egos, partly because each politician has their own individual ego, but also
Mhm.
nations have an ego of sorts, and you don't want to come back to your country having lost face in into the world because it puts you as a politician in an uncomfortable and difficult position.
Mhm.
Um,
Oh,
so
great. Have you heard? Do you know who Benjamin McAvoy
no,
is?
Mimi's
I
got
just,
such a good. She's. I'm gonna have to go back through this video and make a note of all of Mimi's recommendations because
I know. Yeah, I found him because I was reading The Tale of Genji, and he, like, right before our read along started for The Tale of Genji, he posted like an hour and a half long like video about it, and it's like really good. So I know who he is now. That was an
uh,
amazing video.
yeah, because I there's so many. I keep my bookshelf every so often. My bookshelf I get recommendations about things. I lose track of so many. There's so many all the time, and I don't know who this
Mm.
person is. I can't watch all these videos.
No.
Um,
Also, in the Spanish Civil War, it was land and freedom as well was
yeah,
their kind of
yeah.
rallying cry.
The Spanish Civil War. That's another one that I really want to read more. That could be a subject for Red September.
Yeah, it could. Oh, I'm excited. I'm super excited. There's so much to explore in communist history, honestly.
Um,
Um, so he talks about nationalizing an industry, and I wasn't sure what the difference between that and collectivizing was. So is the difference just that one refers to farmland and the other is like an umbrella term that refers to
well,
other industries?
the way I understand it is nationalisation would be just taking control of, like let's say, because we did it after World War II. So we nationalised the steel industry, we nationalised the mines, we nationalised
Really?
shipbuilding, um,
Oh.
and so it basically brings them under the control of one. I mean, it's effectively the state makes them makes turns lots of private steel companies say into a monopoly.
Mm.
Um, and the state runs it. The state puts managers in place. The state takes the money from it. The state pay blah blah.
Yeah.
Whereas collectivization is more about it is effectively nationalizing farmland. But it's more about bringing because obviously because you can't really bring all farms under one
Mhm.
thing. So it's effectively taking X number of farms and forming a company, for want of a better word, out of a number of farms, and
Mm.
then it's sort of like I suppose it's almost like a court. It's a very extreme form of cooperatism. It's like it's like cooperative companies. It's basically, oh, we all work together. We the profits come back to us, blah, 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 collectivize it under one thing. But it's a sort of more extreme version of that. That's how I understand it. Again, not an expert, so I could be
Well, that makes sense. It seemed like on the farms, the collectivizing, at least originally in Russia, really was owned by the people. Whereas when I think of nationalizing, I think of like, PG&E in California is public gas and electricity. And that's like the government controls all of that versus like a commune that is a farming commune. That to me was like maybe just literally owned by the people versus run by the government.
I think collectivization was supposed to be that the people who worked on the farm owned the farms, but they wanted them to be on a bigger scale. Because Russian farming was a lot of small scale farms, and I think they wanted to be on a larger, more industrial scale, and which meant not really much individual land ownership. I think Lenin sort of changed his mind a bit on this after it went so badly wrong to start off with, and then, but yeah, I think that's the way I understand it. And then Stalin, when he took over, just forced it through and ended up killing lots of people as a result.
Oh yeah, I know. Once
Ukraine.
Stalin gets involved, it's the government is controlling it. It's no longer in control of like so many other things in communism. It started off as a good idea and then went terribly, terribly wrong.
Yeah, the argument with a lot of these things is that it starts off as a.
I'm sorry, I just realized I was muted. You probably couldn't hear me talking.
I could. Sorry. The problem with. The problem with a lot of left-wing view, and I consider myself to be quite left-wing. The problem with a lot of these things is that if you replace capitalism with something that isn't capitalism, and therefore money is theoretically not important, something else becomes important to replace it. And in communist Russia, it was power. So power became the currency of who effectively became money. And I think all left-wing philosophies never quite deal with the problem of human beings as human beings. And there's always some unpleasant bastard out there that will do whatever is required to.
Yeah, you can't trust people to do what's best for other people. I've been listening to a memoir right now called Sociopath, and she just talks about how is it 10% of the population or maybe more literally they just think differently. They don't think of the consequences. They're just if they're curious about what's in your purse and you're not sitting there with your purse, they'll just grab it and look through your purse. The consequences, what feels right to most of us, they don't feel that. They don't worry about that. They have to learn to think that way because they don't think that way. So I just feel like there's always going to be people that are going to take advantage, if for no other reason than because they think differently. They have a different code of ethics. They so you just can't necessarily trust people, unfortunately.
No, I think you can. I've come to believe in my old age that you can do things over a period of time. But the problem is but you have to keep fighting the same. You're going to have to repeat the same fights because every so often somebody's going to counter revolution. So currently, for example, we've got capitalism is at the ascendant of sorts, and it's as powerful as it's ever been. It's got no real rivals, and states have been undoing. Well, Britain and America have been undoing the benefits from the 40s, 50s, and 60s, 70s gradually since the 80s, to the point at which it's a different world for. I mean, I suppose I would say Anglo-Saxon capitalism has taken a step backwards, but the pendulum swings back again the other way at some point because people just have enough. And if you can't, and also as I've constantly pointed out to people I have arguments with on this, if your system requires you to make people poorer and poorer because you need to cut their wages and you cut their wages and you cut their, to make for you to make more money, eventually people aren't going to be able to buy the stuff that you make because they can't afford it. If your workers can't afford to buy the stuff you're making, now obviously that's not obviously Rolls Royces, for example, and jets and things, but as in if the people who work for you can't afford to pay their rent, then you've got a problem coming down the line because, and I think that's what it's. In fact, the Russian Revolution, I think there's an element of kind of that. I think it needed more than just that situation. It needed more than just rich people and poor people, and it needs something else to be added to that to start the ball rolling for revolutions and things. I think you can have things bubbling under, but nothing's going to really move until you add something to that. And in the case of Russia, I think it was the war. And once that war started, the Tsarist Russia was screwed regardless, I think. And it might not have been it might not have been the Bolsheviks, but the Tsarist Russia was done.
Yeah. Oh, man. The middle class. I love the conversation, Mimi. Thank you for talking with us. So okay,
I think. Sorry, what she said about devolution, not revolution, I think is spot on. You give power to you. The problem with governments is they don't like giving power away, but actually. That is the way to do it. Is to give power to the people. Actually, genuinely give power to the people. Now, sometimes you think, oh God, that would be a terrible idea. Because, for example, if you gave power to the British people, I'm pretty sure they'd vote back. Well, actually, maybe they wouldn't. But I'm pretty sure the death penalty would be back on the agenda within a week.
Really?
Yeah, because people always. It's one of those things where people always talk about it. So, but you have to have faith in the people you're. The problem is, I think, with the Bolsheviks, like with a lot of left-wing organisations, is that they talk very high and mighty about the working classes, but they don't entirely trust them.
Yeah, you can definitely see that in the Russian Revolution too.
Yeah, and I think that comes across. I think Trotsky. I think maybe by the time he was writing this, because he'd been given a kicking by Stalin, perhaps he comes to that conclusion as well. But yeah.
Well,
sorry, I'm waffling on again.
No, you're good. I feel like this section. I don't know that there was a lot to talk about with this section, so I'm like, I'm almost feeling like we covered it.
I was quite fascinated by the fact that I'm still quite baffled that they didn't try and seize power in the July days.
Yeah,
it still slightly baffles me, and I don't think Trotsky gives a decent answer as to why they didn't seize the chance while it was there, because they could have done it. They could have easily done it, because when they had that massive protest in St. Petersburg, they could have easily arrested Kerensky and that government. There wasn't enough military opposition to stop them.
Yeah, I know. They hated the government, but they still didn't want to necessarily be in charge of it. So it's like, it is interesting. I feel like that's what half of the book is doing, is trying to explain why they didn't take power here and why they didn't take power here. Because it is kind of a mystery, you know.
Like, because he constantly says, well, we gave the provisional government took power, but it was dependent on the Soviets to actually get anything done. So why constantly throughout this book, it's like, why didn't the Soviets just go away and we'll do everything?
Yeah. Right, because they, even when they were marching on July 3rd, they were saying all power to the Soviets. Well, why didn't they just make the Soviets the power? I mean, they could have, but
I think
I don't know.
Yeah, it's also a question of if they had done that, what I don't know. It's talking about these things like alternate histories is always a bit complicated, but
Yeah.
it's a bit if you give power to the Soviets, it is a kind of slightly more disorganized. They're going well, I suppose the Soviets would appoint a new provisional government effectively. They'll pick for the offices.
Yeah, I get, because they did sort of do that. I mean, the people that are the compromisers were the people that were kind of vote. You know, there were still some people there who had been there before the revolution, I guess, but most of the people by this point have changed. The people who are in power, and it's like Mensheviks and social demo- social revolutionaries who are in power now. So there aren't a ton of Bolsheviks, I guess. So maybe if they just threw everybody out, there would be more Bolsheviks in charge at this point.
Yes. Yeah, and I think and actually I'm not even convinced. I think with the Mensheviks and the social revolutionaries and the Bolsheviks, I'm not sure the differences between them all were as drastic as all that. They just become. I think the Bolsheviks basically got to the point where they were saying we need to act, we need to take control. But again, what's that famous quote about? There's a religious writer that said something like, "Give me chastity and give me something, but not quite yet."
Oh,
I can't
yeah.
I think it might be, but there's two, and that I feel is what the Bolsheviks are doing at this point. They're going, give us power, but not quite yet.
Yes. Okay.
And I'm still slightly baffled about what they're waiting for.
Yeah.
Okay. I thought it was Augustine. Give me something and chastity, but not quite yet.
Yes.
I think there's so I think there's an element of that with the Bolsheviks, but I'm still a bit baffled about what they're waiting for.
Yeah, I know.
What more do they need before they feel comfortable? I suppose we'll find out now in the rest of the book. But what more do they need to be comfortable about properly taking control of power?
Yeah, maybe I mean, I understand. I wouldn't want to be in charge of something that intense either. Nobody was just ready to step up and lead, maybe, but I don't know. They had so much complaints about the people who were leading. Oh yeah, maybe they had cold feet.
Yeah,
they just didn't seem to feel prepared.
I suppose
they were like really unsure.
Yeah, I suppose when you've been like your whole life has been spent dodging prison or in exile and
having no power at all.
Yeah, having no power, but wanting to change the world, and then finally it looks like you might have the opportunity to change the world. Maybe it doesn't look quite as straightforward. I suppose you're still thinking in your head, if this goes wrong, I'm probably dead.
Yeah.
Or I'm in prison for the rest of my, or I'm in Siberia, or I'm in. But most of these people have been in prison or exiled or already. But you never know when. Yeah, it's a bit of a baffle. I'm still not quite sure what the Bolsheviks were waiting for, and I mean, the part of it was they were waiting for Lenin to make up. Was part of it, but I think, Lenin's being a bit like having come back and being very firm about let's get going, let's get this sorted out. He's now gone very like, oh, actually, let's.
Yeah.
Are we quite? Is it quite the right time? Do we need to wait a bit?
Yeah, the leadership wasn't like leading them. Like they were like, let's wait, let's keep giving them time. So yeah. Oh, maybe Napoleon taught them a thing or two.
Yeah.
Hello, Esoteric Sonic. Welcome. Was there anything else you really wanted to hit before we end the show, Tony or Mimi?
No, I feel like I've been doing. I always feel every time we do one of these, I always end up feeling like I'm doing all the talking, and I'm not necessarily making any sense whatsoever.
Nope, you are great. I only had a couple questions this time, and I think we
Yeah.
pretty much covered them all.
Um,
So because this time I just felt like I said, it was like a lot of repetition, so I just didn't have as many questions. But
no, I think
yeah.
the July Day chat they were fascinating, and actually the July Days is the bit that when I did the Russian Revolution at university, the July Day was the bit that they sort of skate over a bit because they normally jump from February to October
From
without
February to October. Yeah, I mean that kind
without
of
talking
makes
too much
sense.
about. Yeah, they don't really talk about huge about what happened in between.
And Trotsky is going to tell us everything that happened, every thought that passed through everybody's mind in between February and October.
Yeah,
We're going to know.
I think what we might get in the next bit, which I am quite interested in, is we might get some of the internal debate in the amongst the Bolsheviks about what to do next.
Yes, that
and
could be
tactics and
interesting.
some of the internal battles.
That should be interesting.
Because I'm sure he must have some shots to take at Stalin.
Yes. I think that's what I'm most looking forward to, is seeing how it went from the people literally have the power to what eventually became the Soviet Union. And I think that's why it's really convenient to be doing this at the same time as Red September, because we're seeing the lead up to Red September, you know.
Well, because reading this has also made me really interested to think. I want to read something on Lenin, the Lenin to Stalin bit of the Soviet Union, the bit when Lenin was in charge before Stalin took over. Because I feel again like when I was at university that we talked about that. We did talk about that a bit.
We read Animal Farm. That was it.
Well, yeah. And I suppose there
Actually,
is
in
Animal
my
Farm.
class, we didn't even read Animal Farm. We just watched the movie. We didn't even read it because we read the other one.
I forget how old that cartoon is. That cartoon's like a 50s cartoon.
I know.
I'm really surprised. I'm genuinely surprised nobody's ever done a remake of like a new. Or maybe they have, and I just haven't seen it. Because you'd think that would be because the animation style of that is very Disney 40s, 50s Disney style.
Yeah, it is.
Reds.
We talked about watching this potentially for Red September, but I think we've pretty much settled on watching the death of Stalin as a watch along for Red September. So we'll tell you guys about the date tomorrow.
I think the problem with Reds and the other Dr. Zhivago is they're both quite very long films.
Very long, yeah.
Whereas at least the Death of Stalin is quite well. Also, Death of Stalin is the one that's quite funny. So
yes, it really is. I think it'll be a good time watching it with our group.
Yeah, so that's probably why I was trying to think if there's anything else. There's probably other things we could watch, but I couldn't think of much. We should really watch
always do Potemkin. It. What was it?
We should really watch Battleship Potemkin because that's only an hour long.
You mentioned that one. Okay, I'll look that one up.
It's a silent film. It's a silent film, but it's an amazing film. I think it's only about an hour.
Next year.
Yeah, exactly. It's 65 minutes long. So I think, from what I remember, I have seen it in the cinema on the big screen.
Wow, that's really cool. A classic. Oh yeah, 3 hours. Okay, that's probably why I put a little vote up in our Red September co-host chat, and everybody was like, "Death of Stalin." I think it's shorter.
Yeah. But yeah.
So I will be very curious to see if the revolution really helped people, because right now they're literally starving. Like, can it get any worse? You know, and all of their everything is going to the war. They're dying in the war. Like, do things actually get better for people post
I
revolution?
think this is a good question actually, because I think like you've still got post revolution, you've got
Sorry.
lots of things. You've got Russia, you've got this like famine in Ukraine because of Stalin. You've got Stalinist purges.
Yes.
You've got then suddenly you're at war again, and millions of you are being killed in the war. I don't
This
think
is
I don't.
what. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, also it goes revolution, civil war, short bit of Lenin, Stalin, World War II. So the revolution doesn't get much time to improve the lives of people post. To be fair, even if they, I mean, I don't. My honest answer is, you get the impression that it did in some ways.
It did in some ways, but then corruption. Mimi mentioned earlier that corruption eventually set in, and that's kind of
Corruption. Corruption is always. I think with revolutions, corruption is always the biggest danger. I think. Because once you've got power like that,
because not everybody's going to be on the same page about giving people what they need, and they're going to try and that's human nature. Grab what you don't really need, but you think you need. So you're going to grab more than you really need.
Yeah, exactly. And the corruption doesn't have to be financial either. Once you're surrounded by people who are too afraid to tell you the truth, then you're in trouble. When you're surrounded by yes men, then you're in trouble. I mean, I was just reading a thing in the paper in something I was reading. I can't remember where it was. I was reading it, but talking about how Stalin totally dismissed the possibility that Germany was about to invade because he thought it was the British spreading disinformation. And people kept sending him warnings, and he ignored it, and then they weren't ready when it happened. And it took them 2 years to get themselves organised. But once they were going, they were obviously Germany was screwed. But
yeah. Oh man. Oh, this was great. Thank you guys so much for coming. Huge thanks to Mimi and especially to my co-host. I really appreciate you coming and chatting with me because I wouldn't be able to do this on my own. So thank you again for coming, Tony.
That's
and I'll really look forward to talking to everybody tomorrow at the Red September TBR Talk live.
Yeah.
And also next month for chapters 26 through 30, I think. That's what we're going to do. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I definitely think we can't do 10 chapters a month.
I don't think so. Maybe at the end when we're like going downhill at high speed, we can maybe do like the last 7 or something like that. But
I think 5 is realistic.
5 is realistic for I think all of us.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. Yes, I'm so glad that you're enjoying it, and we'll see you hopefully tomorrow, maybe. But if not, next month. Take care.
See ya.